COVID-19 and the national lockdown affected every facet of life, and higher education was not spared. Students had to continue studying while at home using online resources, highlighting existing inequalities. To help me unpack how disadvantaged institutions and students from poor socio-economic backgrounds were impacted by online learning is Head of Department of Cultural and Political Studies at the University of Limpopo, Professor Kgothatso Shai, and University of Mpumalanga's SRC President Magagula. Good evening to you both, and thank you so much for your time tonight. Prof, I'm going to start with you. It was always going to be a battle of the haves and the have-nots.
Good evening, and let me also extend my greetings to the viewers at home.
I'm not sure if you heard my first question, Prof, that when COVID-19 hit and it was time to resort to online learning, it was always going to be a battle of the haves and the have-nots.
Yes, I missed that. My apologies, but I think I got the question now. Indeed, as you correctly pointed out, the experiences of the historically black universities vis-a-vis historically white universities in terms of teaching and learning has been quite different, as you will actually have seen that at the time when the historically black white universities were rounding off the first semester. It was at the time when the majority of the historically black universities were only beginning to conceptualize plans in terms of moving from venue-based teaching and learning to online teaching and learning. And this has also had, spillover effect to the academic projects during the second semester. As you have noticed that some universities, such as, your UJ, the University of Pretoria, have already concluded the academic year 2020. Whereas the most of the historically black universities are only geared towards the completion of the 2020 academic year. Possibly those who are lucky or early, that will be by the end of January. Others are aiming for February and March. But above all, in terms of the effect on the quality of the delivery of teaching and learning, you will also have actually noticed that as compared to historically white universities, by and large had already embraced online teaching and learning even before the country and the globe was struck by COVID-19. But unfortunately, with regard to the majority of historically black universities, because of resource constraints and limitations in terms of exposure by the majority of the students, because you will remember that the majority of the students that are served by historical black universities come from the rural areas, come from the disadvantaged communities, poor families. So we only began to experiment really with online teaching and learning during the time of crisis. And therefore, the majority of the historical black universities had to learn through trial and error with the experimentation of online teaching and learning.
And Prof, I'm going to ask us just to pause there because I do want us to canvass this point of, this experiment that had to happen, during such a pandemic, and also just how some of these universities have been using blended methods and thus throwing things into a tailspin. But we also have Carol, who's part of this conversation with Limpopo Professor Kgothatso Shai and University of Mpumalanga's SRC President, Carol Magagula. Carol, before we went for the break, we were, Prof Shai was taking us through just the difficulties that some of the institutions have had to face when it comes to implementing online learning, because a lot of them were experimenting, particularly during a time of crisis. Was it the case at the institution where you were?
Yes, most definitely. Firstly, I would like to outline that the university of which I am in, the University of Mpumalanga, is not really classified as a historically disadvantaged university, but because of the mere fact that the geographical location of the university is at a place where it attracts most students who come from previously disadvantaged backgrounds. Now, the problem emanated from the fact that you will understand that going into online learning, there are gadgets that need to be in place for that online learning to be successful, and of course the likes of your data and everything else. So now, understanding that the university attracts students who are from previously disadvantaged backgrounds, you will understand that now these students had difficulties accessing these gadgets for first, and around about 80% of our students are NSFAS funded, which makes them rather poor. So now the first challenge that we had with moving to online learning was that most of our students did not have gadgets. And of course, NSFAS and the Department of Higher Education came on board to say that they would assist. But up to this day, there is no student at the University of Mpumalanga that has received a laptop that is coming from the department. And now the matter is that now these students are still expected to continue with online learning. The workload then comes back to the SRC, because now we have to find means of how we are going to assist these students. Apart from the pandemic, understanding that it has affected everyone in the country, most of all students, especially those coming from disadvantaged backgrounds, we had to jungle with the pandemic, and on the other side also battle with fitting into the online system. I must say that indeed, as students, we felt really overwhelmed by this situation, because nonetheless, it is quite evident that we come from poor backgrounds, and us coming from poor backgrounds means that we did not have access to these gadgets. And us not having access to this gadget means that somehow our access to higher education was limited in a sense. And the reason behind that is because of the poverty that we come from.
And, it really sounds like this was an uphill battle, Carol. And certainly then it means that then a lot of your counterparts at the university were then put at a disadvantage. Were they able to even write their exams online? Were they even able to complete some of the assignments? Or are you then looking at 2020 as a wasted year?
We cannot really say that 2020 is a wasted year, because, on all sides and all aspects, we tried our level best to save the academic year. However, I must attest to the fact that most of our students could not really complete their assignments in time. They had to come back to campus when the phased return of students was allowed by the minister, and had to continue the assignments on campus because of the access to computers and Wi-Fi. But I must say that the class that had access to these gadgets was far more ahead of those who had to come back and catch up. And really, as an SRC, we do not promote such a stance, because then it means that some of our students, especially the ones that were disadvantaged, are falling back. And it is an unavoidable fact that when exam comes, it will catch up with us. Unfortunately, at the University of Mpumalanga, we were not able to continue with our examinations because of other issues, amongst those, of course, caused by COVID-19. But there were other issues that caused us not to be able to write our examinations. So our academic year has been extended to January 2021, and the new academic year will start in March 2021.
And Prof, when you listen to the challenges that the students then have been faced with, particularly to be capacitated with the gadgets, with the capabilities of being able to take part, like some of their counterparts around the country, particularly from universities that could be in a better standing, were the lecturers themselves also able to access the system properly, or were there also challenges on that particular front?
Yes, indeed. Look, it is not only the students who are affected. Even the lecturers, we extremely affected, because I remember that, for instance, at the university where I am based, it was never until the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, it was never mandated for academics to undergo training on online teaching and learning. And therefore, the first thing that had to be done prior to the rollout of online teaching and learning at the University of Limpopo, what had to happen is that academics had to be taken through a process of online teaching and learning, online assessment, and what have you. But also something that resonates with some of the challenges experienced at the University of Mpumalanga is that at the University of Limpopo, I must say, yes, it was a challenge to start. And even as and when online teaching and learning was rolled out, we experienced challenges. But one can only draw a solution from the fact that the university was able to optimize its resources. Whereas the debate was ongoing within government cycles in terms of the procurement of gadgets, laptops being centralized, and what have you. The university was quick to realize the limitations faced by the government in terms of the effective and timely delivery of laptops to the students. So the university had to tap from its coffers, from its reserve, and procured laptops and distributed them to the students. But obviously there were also challenges, because remember, this challenge was not unique to South Africa. It was a global crisis. So at some point, in as much as the university really wished to procure and distribute the gadgets to the students as soon as it's possible, but there was also a challenge in terms of the supply by the companies that manufacture these gadgets. There was just a higher demand and shortage of supply. And it is on that basis wherein you will find that some students received their gadgets on time, whereas other students received their gadgets later. But there is also another issue which is less talked about, which has really impacted the delivery of quality teaching and learning at historically black universities, including my own university. That is the attitude of the students and even some academics themselves. It took quite some time for the students and even the majority of the academics to embrace the whole notion of online teaching and learning. When it started, you go to an online class of 40 students, you only find 15 or 20 students in attendance. So some students really never took this very, very, very serious until very, very late. And on the other hand, there was also a sort of reluctance on the part of the academics who are deeply rooted in traditional form of teaching and learning. It's quite difficult, to turn someone who has been teaching for over 8 years, for 8 years. This person is used to walking into a classroom with a having, real-time face-to-face interaction with students. And suddenly you need to tell them that, look, what you have been doing for the past 40 or 15 years or 50 years, it cannot work. We need to switch to online teaching and learning. So it took a lot of persuasion and convincing on the part of university administration and management for both the students, community, and also the academics to really embrace online teaching and learning. But above all, on the issue of data, yes, the amount of data that was provisioned to both students and staff, it was never enough. But it was not enough because the universities themselves have got limitations in terms of access to resources. You will remember that there has been budget cuts in terms of subsidy to universities. And unfortunately, historically black universities have been at the receiving end of these budget cuts in terms of subsidies to universities. But on the other hand, as much as we can blame the government and to a certain extent university management for procuring limited data to facilitate online teaching and learning, I think the students also, they've had a negative role that they played. That you find that they receive the data, but they misappropriate it. They use it for things that have absolutely nothing to do with online teaching and learning. Some students at my university, they will be favored with data on the first of a particular month. Within a week or 2 weeks, that data is already obsolete. So, but the data was never enough, whereas the data was not enough, but the data was also misappropriated in certain instances. So, in overall, I think there have been a lot of challenges from the side of the university and also from the side of the government. But there is also the challenge, the reality of the attitude of both staff, academic staff, and the students to embrace online teaching and learning. So going forward, especially in the light of the resurgence of infections, there is a need really for the universities to work very much hard towards the transformation of the attitudes and the behavior of the students and staff community. So that when we as a university and as a country and this globe, we find ourselves in a moment of crisis, we need to rise above individualism, selfishness, self-centeredness, and really come together and assist the government and our universities and the management of our universities. Because if the government fails, everyone fails.
And if I can come in there,
all of us succeed.
If you can pardon me, Prof, if I can come in there so that I can give Carol a bit of time. Carol, what Prof is raising there is that some of the students were not, welcoming of the online learning system, and they did not really embrace it, while others appeared to have misused their data. What were you finding?
Okay, I want to agree firstly with what Prof is saying on the basis of the fact that, I wouldn't rather say some were accepting of the situation or some were not accepting of the situation. It depends on who the system is being imposed to. If myself, Carol, coming from a disadvantaged background, no access to a laptop, no access to a gadget that will enable me to perform to my level best, is then given that an option that I must resort to online learning, really does one think that I would be as accepting as someone who comes from an advantaged university, who at the beginning of this whole online thing, the university was able to provide a gadget for? I mean, it's different. And I think it is not understandable because, the leaders of the system themselves do not understand the point of view that we are coming from. Our argument is that it's not that we are not accepting of the system, but we are against a system that will disadvantage us. If I have no access to a gadget, how will I participate in online learning? How am I expected then to perform in online learning. So I think with students, it was not really a matter of accepting or not accepting. It was the circumstance that dictated how we respond to the situation at that time. And I must say that up to today, we are still facing the same problem, because indeed we have been learning online, forced to learn online, forced to make means to accommodate ourselves in the online learning. But up to today, no one has met us halfway. And it's a concern, because we are still expected to be the generation of students who were in 2020, and were still expected to deliver to the best of their capacity. So yeah, that's basically what I have to say for now.
And for you, Carol, how then do we begin to level the playing field? What would you like the department to do, the Department of Higher Education to do, in order to make sure, and your institution, in order to make sure that they level the playing fields?
The first thing that we would have appreciated was if that, because as SRCs all around the country, we compiled lists of the students that we felt were extremely disadvantaged by the system. We sent it to them. At least let them prioritize those students who are coming from disadvantaged backgrounds, who cannot have these gadgets. Give the gadgets to them, or rather lend the gadgets to them, so that they can be able to also be on the same line with other students. The department and ourselves, of course, were moving with the slogan that no student will be left behind. And now it is a surprise to us that we are continuing as if everything is normal while our students are being left behind. So to make everyone equal in the process, let them give us gadgets that will enable us to perform to the best of our ability.
All right. Thank you so much to you both for your time tonight. That was Head of Department of Cultural and Political Studies at the University of Limpopo, Professor Kgothatso Shai, and University of Mpumalanga SRC President Carol Magagula.